at 28 didn't really process the importance of linking identity to culture so that you draw the right talent, because you can train skill.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to train somebody in life and behavior and how they think and process. And
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Between the Lanes. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for staying with us. You've been with us through season 1. Welcome back into season 2. And listen, if you're new to, watching to what we're talking about, go back and watch season 1. A lot of great stuff. And so we're going to continue with that in this season. We've got a great friend here today, and what the topic's going to be, we're going to find out. how to bridge faith into the marketplace, the business community, from a startup mentality, building teams, organizing, thinking futuristically. All of those kind of fun things are where we're going to go today. We have a good friend, Shawn Ring, with us. Dad, talk a little bit more about Shawn.
Oh, man. Shawn is one of the probably top 5 guys that I respect as a faith-based leader. He leads a company called Avoda, and Avoda has 2 sort of streams. They have a for business arm that reaches into the medical community, and they have a faith-based arm that actually does Bible translation. And Shawn, why don't you give a little more explanation than that?
I bet Shawn can
Actually,
explain it for us. Shawn, go for it.
You did pretty good though, Tom, I have to admit. So Avoda, let me first go with the word, because we picked it very intentionally. It is actually avodah. It's a Hebrew word. It is found in Scripture. You'll find it first in Genesis, then Exodus, then Joshua. And each time you see it, it's got a different expression. So think of it as a word that has 3 meanings, but all 3 meanings are always present. So one of the meanings lead, and the other 2 follow. They're not void of the other 2. So you can lead with one of the meanings, but the other 2 are always present. And it must be a consideration in that word when you're using it. And it was very intentional. The first time you see it is when God goes to Adam, avodah, the garden. He talks about using his craft to really take care of the garden, his work, his ability. The next time you see that is in Exodus, when God tells, through Moses, God tells Pharaoh, let my people go so they may avodah me, and it's worship. And then the third component you find in Joshua, where it says, as for me and my house, we will avodah the Lord, or serve the Lord. So those 3 words, work or your craft, using your craft in a heart of service for the purpose of worship, or worshiping, you bring your craft, you bring your ability in a heart of service. And of course, serving is the same way. And our company is an advanced artificial intelligence company. Now, we're not a user of AI. We originated it, not it itself, but we originate its application into healthcare. And we have our own models. We have double PhDs in artificial intelligence and data science, and about a third of the staff are geeks, real true geeks.
They need to be. I'm actually glad to know that they are.
And then the other third are sales and people that bridge the gap there. But at the end of the day, when does a double PhD get to take their craft and be able to serve and meaningfully? And then in this case, worship, or what does worship look like? And, we have both those that are believers and then those that are not within the staff. So I've got some PhDs there that value you and think of worship in a way that's just more about how do you matter to me, and how do I make sure that my work gets that full expression? And that's the company. And as you said, Tom, there's 2 divisions. We're in language. A channel within the language is Bible translation, and then healthcare. And language is in both those areas.
So you talked a lot about the name already, so I'm fascinated by that for a second, because I think anytime we're beginning something. What we call it or what's in a name
Mm.
is so critical. God is very intentional about even when He declared His name.
Mm.
And His name, He had different reflections of His name depending on what the situation was. He's a God who heals. He's a God who sees, and all these things. So, why was the name of the company so important to you guys?
Yeah. So the name typically reflects the group of people that are walking out that service
Yeah.
into a particular vein, whatever that looks like. And they take on that identity, and you pull culture from that name. And you got to be able to link it back into that name
Mm-hmm.
and then really bring it back into the staff.
Mm.
It's my 5th startup into the market. My first one, I did not care about its culture, the culture level as much. I figured, hey, I'm a pastor's son. I think I'm a good guy. You know, I'm a married. At least one woman thought I was
Yeah.
worthy of it. And if I hire good people, the company would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we ended at 1,000 staff, and I'd say, 2 levels under me, you wouldn't recognize that level of leadership versus what was happening at the senior level. And I hadn't really, at 28, didn't really process the importance of linking identity
Mm.
to culture so that you draw the right talent,
Mm.
because you can train skill.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to train somebody in life and behavior
Yeah.
and how they think and process. And
Yeah.
we were very intentional with Avoda to do this early. Fortunately, we had reprieve from having to hit market too fast. We were birthed during the pandemic, so it gave us a little bit of time while we're kind of waiting for the market to settle down before we penetrated it. So we really focused in on our culture, our values, built that connection between the name and
Yeah.
the core values and how we would onboard staff.
Okay, let's go back to your journey for a second. So you said you were a son of a pastor, so you
Yep.
grew up in a ministry home. Did you feel and I assume faith was active in your life at that
Very,
point? Okay.
very.
Did you feel this pressure to follow in your father's footsteps into ministry while clearly, I guess, having probably this entrepreneurial spirit that was in you? Like, how did you go back to young Shawn, and how did you reconcile this ministry home you grew up in with this sort of heart to do something entrepreneurial?
Yeah. So let me talk about my father for a second, because he really became my early mentor and still is today in many ways in how I deal with conflict or pressure or life. He's very candid with me.
That's a good father.
And I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do.
As probably only a father can do.
That's right. Only a father. And even at my early 50s, I still feel the teenage hair on the back of my neck stand up when we need to talk. You know?
I get it.
Yeah. So, yes, grew up in a faith. My father became a believer, writing a book to disprove God using the
wow.
Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke.
Yeah.
By the time he got to Luke, he radically converted.
Wow.
And then
Did he end up publishing the book?
no,
No.
he never got, he never
Finished.
finished.
Yeah.
And radically converted, and really God called him to be a pastor. And so the rest of his life was about that.
You know, that'd have been fascinating, by the way, for the book, whatever he was writing to disprove, to watch that sort of character arc to
That's
go
right.
from, this atheist disproving to now his Christian journey and so forth. That'd have been a fascinating book.
Well, it's also kind of a joke around we're all Norwegians. So from a 5-6 generations. So we'll go to a family reunion or some kind of connection, and my dad went to use the Bible to disprove it, and now I'm in a spot where we're bringing it to languages that aren't there. You watch that full cycle of heritage and calling and what God's doing. It's pretty cool to see.
That's very cool.
But from a faith, yes, there was pressure. Think I graduated high school in the 80s, and so that's the time stamp that you're kind of processing a young pastor's son, kind of growing up in church, and then knowing that God had a call on my life, He was very clear. My dad actually linked that call to identity. That wasn't his own doing. That was through both spiritual intervention and prophetic and some other ministry, really highlighting the Joshua and his character. And so he really dialed in. As soon as he saw that, which I was around 13, he started, hey, study that man and explain to me what you think. Why is he in the Bible? What was
Joshua specifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
What was his makeup? What did he think?
Yeah.
How did he process? What was his life like?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the bedrock kind of for me on, oh, God in my mother's womb picked me, Jeremiah, saw me, and then in the, not my context, in his, thought of me.
Yeah.
Okay, what would that be? And I believe we all have that, right? We have the opportunity to choose to think of our identity in God's context or our own.
Yep.
And if we make that choice wrong, we usually shoot low. But
Exactly, because we know the frailties of us as humans.
and you're looking at
limitations.
You know, somebody told me, Shawn, I'm just a realist. And I said, you know, that is a socially acceptable form of pessimism.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, exactly.
I think fundamentally,
That's good.
What's hope? What's faith?
Right.
You know, somebody asked, Shawn, you're always so positive. And you know the strength finders.
Yeah, yeah.
So positivity is 30
Oh, really?
for me.
Wow.
So somebody goes, how are you coming across positive when it's on your lower part of your spectrum? And it took me a while to kind of put my head around that because I don't like pessimism at all. You come at it negative, it starts like a cat backwards.
Yeah.
In the room, I'll hear one of my leaders going to town on something, and it's got a negative bent to it, and I immediately fight that voice mentally in my mind. But I found out the futuristic part of me says in the future, all things are on.
Yeah.
Right. So
there's so much opportunity and possibility and hope in the future.
Negativity is usually only in the present.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Right. Or looking back
Yeah.
and bringing it to the present. But rarely is it looking forward and bringing it back to the present.
Yeah.
So I found from that perspective, again, growing up in home that was faith oriented, there was opportunity, but I didn't know what that looked like. And yeah, I was a youth pastor. As soon as I graduated, started leading youth and assumed that's who I was. As a matter of fact, the youth got bigger than my dad's church.
Oh, wow.
We brought in kids from out. Great. I loved it. People converted. We were getting people saved, water baptized, spirit filled. And we thought, man, we could do this the rest of our life. This is great.
Yeah.
And then, but God, yeah, he came in. I remember one time again, I'm 20 or my early 20s. And during a time of conversation with him, and it wasn't, I don't want to over spiritualize it. I was in the backyard thinking of myself. And then he goes, hey, you have an opportunity to miss that Jeremiah 29 piece.
Wait, he is your dad or God?
God.
Okay, God.
He said, you have an opportunity to miss Jeremiah 29 for you. I went, what do you mean? I'm a youth pastor. My dad's a pastor. I'm all in. I mean, you know how many people got saved? I could count. I could give you numbers. No, and it was then at 22, 23, from my perspective, is when I turned my life over and said, okay, I'll trust you and I'll adjust my life. Whatever you say, tell me to go here, I'll go here, do something different, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And that resulted in him asking me to move and into a city we didn't know anyone in.
Wow.
And so it was in that context.
So unpack that for a second, because I think probably what a lot of people struggle with in their own journey. So explain if there's more around that, or if it really was simply you were so sure what God had put on your heart. Because I think people may get a word from the Lord at times and they go, I want it confirmed by other people, and that, which I think is good and wise. But it starts with being sure that God spoke to your heart. And I think from a just being a disciple, that's a key thing. But from a leadership standpoint, how many times will we as leaders be required to go, I know God said this, and
Mm.
now I'm stepping out in faith and obedience
Yeah.
to do this, and no one else is going to get that word, only the leader.
Mm.
Other people can confirm it, but you have to hear it.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you heard that, talk about how you processed that. And you were married at the time?
Yes.
Okay, so you obviously had a partner in
Yeah,
that
my
hearing
wife.
as well. So
And my wife was a fan of me leaving my family, so it was really okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
she loved the idea I was getting out from under my dad.
Get away. Okay.
Yeah, so part of that was good. Part of that was, well, we can't really use that as a,
Yeah.
a validation point.
Right.
So my age, early 20s, and everything I know about ministry and following the Lord at this point was full in its full expression was inside the local church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then that's sacred, or then there's the secular component where you can go out from there.
Right.
And that was the lens by which I was looking at it. What I hadn't realized was that my faith as a child through junior high and high school, I was saved when I was 5, water baptized, spirit filled when I was 10, 11. And junior high and high school was 3 times a year rededicating my life at every summer and winter camp, right? And then coming back. And I had amazing experiences in junior high and high school, expressing my faith and leading. Went to a Christian school, small, so I had a great opportunity. I wasn't one of many, so I was one of few. So I had an opportunity to typically show up in a leadership role, engage. Billy Graham came to Anchorage, Alaska, where I grew up, and they picked me to open the service in prayer. And I think I want to say 13. I could be off by a couple years. And I remember being on stage and not nervous. The Coliseum was filled, as you know, with Billy Graham. He would load the Coliseum and the floor. And they did all these trainings for the people that were down in the congregation that were waiting for people to come forward, and what do you do and all that stuff. So we were all pretty prepared, but I was up on stage. And they had these rows of chairs in the back of the stage and then the pulpit up front. And I was sitting there waiting, and I'm 13. So there's adults there, and I wasn't nervous at all. I remember just thinking, okay, I'll pray. I pray all the time. I pray for my food 3 times a day. Yeah. And as I'm sitting there praying, or sitting there waiting to pray, the service is getting amped up. People are sitting down. It's starting. You could feel the thing starting to start. And then in walks Dr. Graham, and he goes, they had one seat open next to me. So he sits down, and then he puts his hand on my knee, and he goes, so son, I hear you're going to open up prayer. Yeah. Yes, sir. Today is only about one thing. And I remember it today. It's about Jesus. And now, I wasn't nervous till he said that point. And it had nothing to do with Jesus. It had everything to do with, how do I start my prayers? Do I say Jesus? Do I, And I remember going up there, and and he started this. I don't know where you come from, your background, what you believe exactly, all the, but it's about Jesus today. And so really set my lens as I was going up to the podium. I don't remember what I prayed today, but I remember sitting back down, and he put his hand on me, goes, man, you knocked it out of the park.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I hope I said Jesus. I'm just saying, I don't think they recorded that much back then.
Yeah, I'm sure not.
Yeah. But at that point, that was kind of this backdrop to a number of other stories, that when I was sitting there and the Lord said, hey, you have a chance to miss what I have for you.
Yeah.
And, you do struggle in settling what you hope versus what you see.
Yeah.
And when the hole isn't filled,
Yeah.
you question, is this all? Or is there something here that's
Yeah.
not quite right?
Yeah.
So I remember thinking that,
Yeah.
like, oh, this is what I'm prepped for, is this type of a life.
Mm.
And I don't know that I was disappointed. I just didn't know that I was completely in my own skin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just one of those where when he gave that to me about moving, I needed to know he was real,
Yeah.
very real. I'm not saying people coming forward, giving their life to Christ, having your sense that he's with you.
Yeah.
But the God of the scripture I know, it's more than that.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than that.
Yeah.
So how does that express in my current?
Yeah.
That was a gap for me on the backside. Now, that made me wonder if there's an opportunity here that I didn't know about, and I get to see him at a point I've never seen him before.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that became the bedrock for me of when the elders told me I wasn't listening, when my dad said, "Why would you leave our church? You're next in line." All of those types of discussions. And in futuristic, I'd say, well, it still could be, but I think I need to do this.
Yeah.
And then Brendan and I, of course, that's what led us away.
Yeah. So you're speaking to at least an element of the audience that we are trying to reach. I believe in the day in which we live, more and more faith-based leaders who are in the marketplace are trying to bridge this gap and say, how do I live my faith in the context of the responsibility that I have? And that's exactly what you've done, how I've known you. I'm curious if you would describe yourself the way I would describe you. There's this entrepreneurial element of your life
Yeah, very much so.
that plays into what I would call you're an early adopter. You're a pioneer in the things that you do, and I've noticed, or I feel, when it gets to the day in day out maintenance, you have you want to see it done right, no doubt about it. But you empower other people to do that because you are on the front lines. Is that a fair assessment of
Yeah,
you?
yeah, and that was a discovery,
Ah,
right? I don't think I knew that's who I was at the beginning. I think the idea that I was going away from ministry versus going to it was with me the first 5 to 6, 7 years.
yeah.
As I was going, my first company, we were there to fix a problem. I was, think about this, it's early 90s. The multimedia is now prevalent. And what you had to go to a convenience store behind the black glass and pull a magazine out to get in front of everybody was now available, pornography available in your bedroom.
Right.
And it was in that context I was speaking to friends, husbands, church family that were getting destroyed because this was now so prevalent. I thought, yeah, you filter water before it gets to the house. There's got to be a way. It's a pipe. There's got to be a way we could filter it. And I remember that opened up really how I've seen my entrepreneurial background has been trying to find the right question.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been elements to that that are personal, even because every question leads to an answer. And whatever question you ask, there's really only two paths to that question. And I'll bridge it to faith. It's either life or death.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
not a.
Yeah.
So if you ask the wrong question fueled by the wrong thing, it can lead to death.
Yeah.
And I've found in my faith in business, I have to be very cognizant I'm not asking that question from the wrong genesis point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it could be a financial transaction, a leadership one, a management one. And if I don't take care, I'll find myself in a situation of my own making
Yeah.
that is not bringing support. So the idea of kind of how that progression happened in the business, I asked a question. Next thing I know, we started the company. And I hadn't realized how much reliance I needed outside of my own ability because, again, I hadn't finished my undergrad.
Mm.
And I think the best entrepreneurs don't have a degree. There's no backup,
Mm.
right? It's
Yeah.
not like you can go get a job down the hall when things are getting
Right.
bad and you can go make a couple $100,000. You have no options.
Yeah.
And we call that the cockroach effect in our space. You could take a nuke and stay alive, right? And that is how you get the business off the ground.
Mm.
And we did that throughout the first 6 years. That company turned into 130 million a year in revenue, 1,000 staff. We became the #1 filtered service in the 90s. I remember I was 28. Most of people who didn't know me wondered who I knew.
Mm.
Right? At the time, I just said I just obeyed.
Yeah.
And I was pretty naive and idealistic, I would say. I didn't necessarily know what I didn't know. And at the same time, I'm just over my head every day.
Mm.
Okay, so I got to ask, when you're addressing your dad and the church elders or leaders and saying, "Yeah, I got to go," money was not the motivator. Am I right?
That is correct.
You weren't leaving to
Start a company.
Yeah, start a company and get rich.
That's right.
You were leaving out of sort of a drawing to make a difference and do it on a faith base.
Yeah. My decision was I needed to know he's real.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't so much the church component, him and me.
Yeah.
He said, can you obey? And if you obey, you'll experience who you are, who I made you to be, and then I'll be a part of that.
Mm.
And for me, either I'm going to do this and it's real,
Yeah.
or why am I doing it?
Yeah.
It's a complete waste of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not that I questioned my faith. I questioned whether or not I understood that there was not just a gospel of salvation, there was a gospel of the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so just because I had the gospel of salvation didn't mean I fully understood the gospel of the kingdom. And the gospel of the kingdom was fully dependent that I had salvation.
Yeah.
But I could have salvation and never realize this.
Right.
And this is the thing that I was fighting for, was could
So
I
good.
experience that?
Mm-hmm.
And was that real? And if that was real, then this was more than I'm going to get a parachute when I get out of here.
Right. Right.
There was something today, and that's what fueled me, and it fuels me today on what we do in the business.
Mm. This is maybe a little tangent, but you said something a second ago, and I'm curious if you think you said about that sometimes people who say they're realists is just another way of saying,
Socially
they're
acceptable form of pessimism.
Is idealistic a socially accepted form of sort of
Positivity or-
optimism
Yeah.
that is maybe
That's a great question.
just as you said it, I was like, I feel like idealism is to positivity what realism is to negativity in a way. Both. I'm just anyway because I would say when you said that, probably the struggle I've had is I would have been the guy who has said the realist side, and maybe sitting across the table, my father is one who would have said he's an idealist. And we've found ourselves, and I don't think I'm negative. I don't think I'm a pessimist.
No, yeah.
And I don't think he doesn't, move past facts to look towards, only positive things. But anyway, I think it's a very real thing. People who are watching will find themselves going, yeah, I think I'm a realist, or no, I'm really an idealist. And both of them might be ways of saying, if you really, allow yourself to reflect, if you surround yourselves with a bunch of realists, you maybe aren't going to get anywhere. If you surround yourself with a bunch of idealists, you might fall through a hole because you didn't see something that could have been there.
That's
Yeah,
good.
and I think fundamentally you can't balance without opposite pressure.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, and I have found, I don't know if you've ever done the exercise where you're either a blue, a yellow, or red, or some color. Blue, I don't remember the name of it. I was searching for it, but reds are kind of achieving, yellow or vision, and sunny sky.
Yeah.
Green is empathetic and people, and
Yeah.
blue
that
is
sounds sort of
data.
familiar.
Yeah,
Okay.
blue is data,
Yeah.
and I want to see. And this is where we are, people.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. And the red, yellow will be like, who cares where we are? We're going to be going this way, and it's
Yeah.
going to be fine.
Right.
You know, I have come to respect the blue in the room because I've found where you start is important to get to where you're going,
Yeah.
and where you are matters. I mean,
Yeah.
my wife tells me all the time, I don't know what house you're living in, but the house we're living in today, this is what we're dealing with right
Yeah.
now.
Well, and I think no matter what of those colors you are or what
Sure.
way that you're wired, at the end of the day, everyone, but especially the leader, has to be solely focused on, especially if you have a faith to you, what is God calling you to do? And so you can factor in other things that can help you get along, the journey, but making sure that you're rock solid on this is what God said. And so that's in your story. What I'm captured by in that moment was as a young 20s with really a future that had been determined for you in a way, you heard from the Lord and said, I'm pivoting. I'm starting a new trajectory that really shapes the rest of your life. And that's not easy to do.
No.
And the other thing that I feel about it is, I don't know, I feel like in people's lives, my own life has this example too, where when you're young, it's like the Lord gives you those opportunities that really, He can give you later in life as well. But when you get later in life, it's kind of like, well, you're more anchored, right? You're more settled down and where you live, and maybe kids, and the ability to pivot real time. It's sort of like, hey, if you're young and in your 20s, look for those opportunities because that's when you really can do it the
So
easiest.
true.
And now, having said that, I was thinking biblically of a story, just thinking about Moses, who was 80 at the burning bush moment. His life took a major trajectory change. He's out in the wilderness, doing his shepherding stuff, and then God, shows up to him in the burning bush. Well, he's 80, so he
Yeah.
wasn't a young guy by any means. So God can show up at any point.
Oh,
Hey, you're not 80.
I know, but
Uh,
it's
but
fast approaching.
the point of it is, I guess I'm thinking out loud to say, yeah, ultimately God can call us and change our story and rewrite what He's doing in our lives at any point, as long as our heart is postured to obey.
Absolutely. Typically, what I think of entrepreneurs, a typical characteristic is when they become convinced, this is what I need to do, they shove everything in. They're willing, they're high risk takers, and they're willing to bet the farm on what's happening, and that attracts other gifted early adopting people. Are there examples in your leadership? I'm sure there are. I know there are. But are there any you'd like to highlight at this point that as a leader, it's part of fulfilling this thing that God has called you to, required you to push everything in at the risk of everything you had?
Yes, I'm going to answer that. Before I do, I want to set a foundation before I reply. So, my wife and I exited that company. The first one, it was called Integrity Online. It was a filtered internet service. When we exited, I swore I would never go back to business again. Men and money didn't mix. We were sued 20 some times, and we bought 18 companies. We were behind pretty much every brand in the US that was doing filtered service, PKNet, Amway, Family Channel. And again, I said idealistic. I was idealistic. So I expected, if I'm talking to a Christian, I expected this behavior or integrity or maybe a little character at the same time, And so again, being young, but also big learning, I told the Lord, I'm done. And really what that set me up for is a question He gave me, very similar to the back of the yard when He gave it, hey, you can miss. And He usually opens up with a question. He always does. And I was on a plane from Atlanta to South Africa. I was meeting with Graham Power. We were doing something with the Global Day of Prayer. And in the plane on the way over, He said, Shawn, when do I do anything that doesn't profit? And I thought to myself, I think I was a little snarky on that. I said, the flood didn't work for you too well, did it? And He didn't even entertain the response. And I was sitting there processing it. And profit, of course, is broader than money,
Mhm.
right? It's growth, it's increase. Is there anything I do that doesn't profit?
Mm.
And I was sitting there processing it, and I come to the conclusion, yeah, no, not the God I know.
Mm.
Everything you do profits eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
I usually
Eventually.
limit it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
But for the most part, yes. And he was quick.
Mm.
His reply was quick. So why do you care about your tax code when you obey me? And it was something as a business. Now, again, merger, M&A, 18 acquisitions, lawsuits. I understood corporate structures, franchising systems, banking, due diligence, all the, I understand that whole. So the idea of the tax code driving our culture and our operating model
Mm.
as
Our
a person,
decisions,
our decision.
Yeah.
You know, the arguments would say, well, it's the world, it's not personal,
Mm.
right? So you got to be that way there
Mm.
versus inside. And you know, it took me a while on that trip to kind of settle into, well, it isn't wrong if you're working for somebody and you can't dictate the tax code,
Mm.
but when you're an entrepreneur, it your genesis matters,
Yeah.
and how if you can get the job done and you can throw tax code solutions at the problem, you do the right one for stewardship, right? And not that it changes your behavior.
Mm.
What I realized very quickly is I did the ministry for my identity, men's approval versus versus this is just how it's done, and I better do it the way everyone's done it before because that's the way you do it.
Yeah.
And again, as an entrepreneur, I go, no, disruption. We change the way we do it. And it happens all the time in
Yeah.
business. It happens all the time in ministry. People do something new. Everyone looks at it and goes, that worked. We're in.
Yeah.
And so it did take somebody to think of doing something new
Yep.
in order to engage in that. So that's the backdrop to that. By the way, that led me to start another company in Singapore. So at that moment, I really changed my lens to, okay, tax codes, how, let's throw all that aside. What am I being asked to do? And now how do I design it to do what it is I need to get done?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there have been times I designed wrong, had to throw out the original design and then bring in the new design and then do change management to get everyone onto the new design because I learned. So that is a backdrop to the question. Let me make sure I got it. There's a reason we were going there. You just asked me. I'm trying to remember the question.
Question about, I know that there's examples of you shoving it all in.
Okay. Yeah. So my first experience now after this, very clear that my tax code didn't matter. Right. And so I went, okay, what do you want me to do? And he gave me an identity piece at that time, but we went after, I was going to South Africa, if you recall, and they have a monopoly. And in my line of business, which is technology, he owns the pipe, owns the content. So if I'm bringing the pipe, I own what's on it. So infrastructure is important, especially in second and third world countries. So if I'm bringing in infrastructure, I have the ability to manage what content's being delivered. I have a say. So the movies, the education, the what's on that. So we leaned in that way, and I put my chips on the table, and we went in and we figured guy was going before us and everything. This is him. And I spent several $1 million and we failed miserably. And I remember coming off of that going, that was very public. I mean, it wasn't even quiet. I mean, we had groups that were documenting it so that it could be duplicated because I believed it. This is, you say, times that I go, as an entrepreneur, yeah, I believe it. Now, did I get it right the first time? Probably, chances are low. You know, so I'm processing that, but at the same time, God's behind me. Why did I fail? And I remember coming off of that, my wife and I, we met in Alaska, and so from Alaska, Hawaii is the cheaper vacation.
Hmm.
Fiji's the one everyone really wants to go to.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking nobody knows me in Fiji. Let's go. So we pack up and get out of there so that we could just lick our wounds and heal.
Mm.
And I remember our first night there. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ken Greenlee. He pings me and he goes, "Hey, I hear you're in Fiji. I'd like to introduce you to this paramount chief." And I said, "I don't think you've heard. I failed miserably. It's very public. I'm not your guy."
Hmm.
No, we're down in the lobby. We'd like to meet with you. And I remember coming down there going, well, first of all, I talked to Brenda. She's like, "You are on vacation. They're in the lobby. What do I do?" Okay, fine. You have an hour, a couple hours, but we got to go out. So we ended up doing that. And long story short, the Paramount chief basically needed the same solution that we had done in South Africa. And at that particular point, we were very concerned because it was a monopoly, same thing in South Africa. Smaller population, so the revenue numbers and the multiples weren't there. And again, this is all within 24 hours of my visit. Okay, this wasn't a long, drawn out process. He goes, "What do you need?" I go, "Well, you could probably do a hub and spoke model across the 300 islands, microwave, and then let me make a phone call real quick." So I call my contact at SES Americom, which is satellite. And sure enough, there's transponder satellite space over Western United States and South Pacific, so we can bring in bandwidth. I go, "Well, then I'd need a letter from the Prime Minister giving us permission." I just kind of listed it out. Anyway, you guys have a great time. I'm going to go. It's nice. Let's pray. And we were all, and about 2 hours later, he calls me and says, "You have a meeting with the Prime Minister in the morning." And I go, No. We aren't even remotely ready to talk to the Prime Minister. And of course, I didn't even have a suit. I mean, I got flip flops and shorts. So he brought a tailor over and they put a Zulu on me, like the dress,
Yeah.
and the suit. So they fitted me in a suit.
Wow.
And we went over there and I said, "I'll just talk." Well, what had happened was the Prime Minister delayed his flight to meet with me. I had pretty much said, "No, I'm not going. We are not ready to, this will be dead on arrival." And we get there. I kind of gutted the South Africa plan. So I took the South African and just kind of gutted it, put some designs that it's a straw man. We'll use that and just say there's a concept here. It could probably work. And as we put it up, by the time we were done our presentation, the Prime Minister goes, "Here you go. First time in the history of our country. Here's a license to do satellite in the South Pacific." Now, remember I'm in shock. I'm sitting there. What just happened?
You just failed.
Yeah.
And
I'm on vacation.
Yeah.
I spent several $1 million and failed. And here I was paying for a holiday. Right. And now I still didn't know. And by the way, this leadership was friend of Ronald Reagan. He was general that had helped independence. He had taken over and saved the country from a coup in 2000. Strong believer, and they're praising the Lord on the way back to the hotel, and I'm just quiet, reflecting in the back seat. "Shawn, you look depressed," and I'm just going, No, this is great. I have no idea what I'm thinking. I have no idea what I'm going to tell my wife, what I'm going to tell the team back home. I'm still processing how this even worked. And in the elevator, I heard this from the Lord. Lord goes, "Hey, I don't need you to get anything done." Okay. The level of your failure, okay, that you experience, and your education and your experiences, recognize the depth of the miracle that just happened. And your only job now is to tell my story. And by the way, you don't tell stories well. That's what he said. And so it's in this context where, we realized, again, in an entrepreneurial state, that ended well, right? We ended up going that way. But 9 times out of 10, what I found is failure is part of the success and almost a requirement toward it. And if you don't see it, you should be concerned,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Well, and I think the benefit of someone who is a futurist in their thinking is you're able to sort of leap over the failure to see
Mm.
the hope for the future.
Mm.
I feel like that's maybe more of an opportunity that someone who's more futuristic in their thinking can do. And where I think people get stuck is in that very moment of failure. They're too in the moment, and unable to look beyond the moment to go, okay, if I did what I felt like God called me to do, and this resulted in a failure, then what am I to learn?
Mm.
I think one of our other guests said failure isn't losing, failure is learning.
Mm.
And so if you can truly adapt your thinking to be failure is all about the learning, not what actually happened in the moment of the failure, then actually you are able to build upon that to then go to the next thing that God's called you to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a book called Crossing the Chasm. And in this book, it's a business book, but the principles are fairly similar. And when you bring technology to market, 9 times out of 10, you're not duplicating anything that's out there. So early adopters are your target, and that there's a chasm between the acceptance of the early adopter and then your ability to get to early market.
Mm.
The early market are looking for something that they can just check a menu and get and take away and use, where the early adopter is a part of putting their fingerprint on it.
Mm-hmm.
But the key to that, and it's hard because when you bring a group of people, there's always never a time that they all have been here before.
Mm-hmm.
So you are dealing with people that are in different parts of the company, whether in leadership, management, or just in a skilled position. They're measuring you
Mm.
and they chose to follow you.
Mm-hmm.
And failure sometimes doesn't look like they made the right decision
Mm.
to come work for you.
Mm.
And as a leader, how do you steer that lens
Yeah.
with words that are proactive, not reactive? If you're reacting to a situation, it's harder to get out of that
Yeah.
than if you're proactive in it.
Yeah.
And we always say, hey, we're here to lean. You fail forward here.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
fail forward here. And shame is not an option
Mm.
here. Okay. Because most times shame expresses itself as not wanting to fail.
Right. Right.
And boy, you get that. You call something toxic to a young company's ability to arrive is somebody with a deep sense of shame,
Yep.
and they're worried that they will fail.
Mm.
And you see it right out of the bat because they don't ever fail.
Yeah.
And when you
Yeah.
say, hey, this is a problem, they go, no, no, no. And they will justify that all
Yeah.
day long. And you're
Yeah.
going, no, 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 no. Just
Yeah.
own it. Just own it, please. We
Mm.
got to move on.
Okay.
I don't care that you did it. Let's
Okay,
just move on.
So, one of the values that we have, that we try and impart to leaders, is to underpromise and overdeliver.
Hmm.
In everything you just described, you are in the seat of promising something that has never been delivered.
Hmm.
How do you manage the tension of convincing investors,
Yep.
employees,
Great point.
with the confidence that says, no, I know this is going to work. Follow me when you're
Yeah.
forging away.
It's important to know the absolutes and the non-absolutes when you cast vision. Okay. Because if you cast vision on an absolute that is going to be defined and it doesn't come out the way you just cast it, you got a problem. If the end result isn't, in my case, revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So if it's not to it, but the principle works wherever you're current. It's very difficult. And by the way, we've talked about the colors, blues, the data. So they're my realists in the room, and I'm saying, hey, we're going to do this, and you fight it. You're in a vision, saying we're going to do this, and then you're in a meeting, and I'm casting vision to a customer, and I'm painting an experience, not a product with features because I don't know what it looks like yet.
Mm.
But I know once I get it right, you will experience that,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So I stay focused on the thing that is the driver
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not necessarily something that we'll have to adjust
Mm.
along the way. So I'm not making a bed that I got to stay in, and so it's difficult. And normally, what I do with the data in the room or the realists in the room is I have to throw the disclaimer out quickly that, hey, I'm going to paint a picture. It's more about experience. Just remember, it is not about the product,
Mhm.
and we're not there yet. And if we were, then we wouldn't be doing this right now.
Mm.
We would be doing something differently.
Yeah.
So we're here, and then I notice they back off because I've had it where I forget because I'm living in my world,
Yeah.
and I'll do it, and I'll get done and go, when are we going to start selling stuff we can actually do?
Yeah.
Right? Because in their mind, today we can't do it.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. Today we cannot do that. If we could, we would not be right here.
Yeah.
We would be right there.
Yeah. And that's a challenge for a visionary leader to be able to stay visionary, but also be able to come back to the team
Mm,
and recognize the here and now.
Mm.
So going back and forth, constantly keeping vision ahead, but having either it's the read the room, understand the team, know what's needed in the moment to be able to come back from the vision to the reality of today. That's a big challenge. And I want to ask you about team dynamics. Okay, so
Mm.
we're kind of getting wrap up sort of 6 different startups and companies, and you've exited and gotten in and out and so forth, and where you are today. I want you to answer a question about a team from a leadership standpoint and what you're looking at in the team. What have you learned about the type of people that you need in doing startups and growing companies? And what advice would you give to people in terms of their own characteristics? What are top characteristics you are looking for in people? So what did you learn as a leader, and what are you looking for in people?
Yeah. So not every what I do know is at every stage of growth, not everyone can grow to every stage.
Mm.
Right. So there are people that are amazing in ambiguity.
Mm.
Right. And they'll excel, they'll do really well at the first couple stages of a company startup. A lot of ambiguity. You got a white canvas
Mm-hmm.
and you get to put your finger on that white canvas
Yeah.
and it'll look like whatever you want it to look like. And they love that.
Yeah.
Then there's and we started off this whole point of managing. Shawn, I'm an entrepreneur and builder.
Mm.
I get it to a point and then I need to hand it to somebody to refine it and keep it going. In that particular case, I've learned enough to know that I got to exit out of one particular position to lean in on my strengths. And that's as a founder and an entrepreneur, that I've come to realize where I've held on to something too long.
Yeah.
And now I'm losing customers
Yeah.
because I'm not doing a good enough job serving
Uh-huh.
in this particular piece. So what I've done with team, you got skill, you got management, and then you got leadership
Mm.
that make up a person,
Yeah.
right? So they've got a craft that come in, you need their skill to get it done. Eventually you want to know that they can use that skill and manage their time wisely.
Mm-hmm.
And once they're managing their time wisely, you hope that they could manage a couple other people's time wisely,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
They don't necessarily need to have all the same skills, but they need to be able to manage.
Yeah.
And then eventually someone should lead
Yeah.
if as that team starts to get. And again, what I found with team dynamics is there are things you should have that are negotiable, and then things you should have that are non-negotiable
Mm.
on a team.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are made up of the leader, because some of those non-negotiables are because I need them
Right.
because of my weaknesses.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then so what I've had to do, and we mentioned this earlier about being proactive instead of reactive to a problem, because when it looks like reactive, it looks like you screwed up.
Mm.
And so you're busy trying to fix that up,
Yeah.
which, by the way, and it's going to lead to my first characteristic. It's around the word character.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we've heard, I think it's Covey, you're as fast as the speed of trust,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Character is the first thing people identify as a flaw to trust
Mm.
in a leader
Yep.
or a manager
true.
or a team member,
Yep.
right? And you don't ever see character until there's pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very hard to vet
Yeah.
before you
point.
bring it in until that pressure hits. And then you go, oof.
Yeah.
And they're cutting and running
Yep.
or they're pointing the finger. And what I had to do in our company is start to, one, we're growing. So in our company, we've gone through the, angels, seed investing. We are no longer a startup. We're now a young company and we're entering the market.
Mm-hmm.
And the market's doing well and they're receiving us and we're growing. So we're in high growth. The first 2 years were just disruptive, trying to figure out who is our customer, what do they want, and what's the messaging that they'll respond to. Those are really the three components. While you're in the middle of that, again, being the fifth company, I knew the timing because in a company, when you bring it to market, you got to find out what's middle fairway on risk for investors. They don't want you on the sides of that fairway. They want you middle. And otherwise, if they don't see you middle, finance, your head count, your path to growth, the time in which you're approaching that, if you don't keep all those at bay, those levers, you start to drift, it'll be very hard for you to capitalize the company and get it to where it needs to go. So you got to keep it in the center. Well, you do know a general timeline on when you're going to hit the hockey stick. And so you want to make sure you're ahead of that hockey stick, investing in these principles of team, because you're about to scale at a ratio you cannot control. And if that core group underneath you can keep those characteristics, then you don't have to whack-a-mole while you're trying to get this company growing, because they'll just all of a sudden people are going, what is wrong with our company? It was so cool 2 years ago. I think this company now is terrible and I now want to go work for somebody else. And so character is one of the number one issues. Can you own your stuff? Did you own it? And did you publicly own it? If you publicly presented it, then you publicly own it.
Is that two different things? Because there's so many things around character that I hear you saying, but I hear that as almost a separate one to character and its ownership. Now you could group it under it, but I almost wonder if there's a separate deal that maybe reflects your character, but your ability to own your stuff, to take responsibility, get done what you need to get done. Anyway, I just wonder if those are two different things.
I agree with you, Todd. I think for the most part, there is one that's connected to the character, and that's in failure.
Right.
So I have found most times in the middle of that failure, if the leader pushes it to somebody else or brushes it over and doesn't recognize it and just keeps moving on, you lose good people.
Right.
And it's counterintuitive. You feel like you don't want to because they would need strength.
Right.
But then they need transparency with that strength. And otherwise you're the emperor with no clothes on.
Right.
Well, yeah, I'm just so interested. I would have thought you would have said, well, that leads me to my second point, humility.
Yes.
If in the midst of this, they can't own their own stuff, then it's not just character now, it's a lack of humility.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's how you present it. It's everything from, I've got a team and we're coming to a customer, and how I introduce them. Right. And how do I defer in the room? I'm already the CEO when I'm walking in.
Right.
I don't need to prove anything at this point, except that I'm a good one. So I better serve my team and put them forward, because my job is to find good people.
Yeah.
Well, and you were talking about that when I think about character traits as well. You were talking earlier about just one of your learnings was your ability to empower people. And part of empowering people is communication, making sure they're caught up with where you are in the future, and being able to have the vision, but not be so far ahead of your people that your people are like, that's great that you got vision, but I got no idea what you're talking about, or no idea where we're going. And the only way that they can truly be empowered is if they're communicated to well.
You bring up a really good point. And this was something only my last two companies I adjusted. The first three, I was trying to figure out how to keep the acceleration going and empower. And what I've come to find is if you push, because what does empowerment feel like? And how do you actually walk that out as a leader?
Yeah.
And then you give it to somebody and you hope they have it, or you create a job description. You say, here you go, you now have it. I'm going to
Right.
hold you accountable to it. Okay, those are building blocks, but how do you get it in the moment where they feel empowered to do what it is
Yes.
you're asking them to do?
Yep.
And there's obviously some things you could do to undermine
Mm-hmm.
that empowerment,
Yes.
and they're easy to see only after you've done them,
Yeah.
right? But the one I want to lean on for me that's been very practical is in a meeting with leaders and leaders. So I've got several layers of leaders. How do I help them all empower?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've found that works really well is this repetition of saying, push the decision down to the point of impact.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is somebody talking to a customer, they should be fully empowered to make the call.
Mm.
But I understand.
Yeah.
But no,
Yep.
because I'll tell you right now, it doesn't call it that person a customer, a friend, uh, a counselee that you're talking to, whatever. That person's looking for an answer.
Right.
And if they want to know you care, and you're this idea of, well, I'm going to have to get back to you.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
kind of like, well, then why are you here?
Yeah. Why am I talking to you then? Yeah. Let me
why-
talk to your manager.
Yeah, you clearly are not the person I want.
That's
I want
right.
to talk to
I'm-
the decision maker.
Yeah, think about a problem like, hail.
Right,
And
right.
sorry, I can't answer your insurance question.
Yeah. Exactly.
Then why did you answer the phone? Please. Yeah, it's that kind of
Yeah.
behavior. And I've noticed when I make that statement, it really causes people to process, how do I apply that at my level?
Mm-hmm.
And then with that, what I've asked my leadership to do is it does two things. It doesn't bring if the decision's here, it doesn't have to come up and
Yeah,
down, up
yeah,
and down.
yeah.
And then then how do you get them looking? If they're looking this way, because every once in a while they'll go off reservation,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
We don't even have that. Why were you selling? That. So they're coming off reservation. How do you keep that? And what we've done in our environment has, in our review process, how do they check alignment?
Mm-hmm.
And they should be able to look to me and connect the dots
Yeah.
to that decision. And if they can't, there's a problem.
Yeah.
And those are the two key points that we've given our staff
That's
to
great.
kind of
It's awesome.
to be able to bring that and reproduce it.
Okay, so we've talked about the journey of obedience, what that looks like. We've talked about what it looks like to take risks and how that's tied to our faith. We've talked about team dynamics and what that looks like for a team. As we wrap up, I want to lean into your futurist, okay, and just on a practical level, in a couple minutes, what's exciting you today? What is the futurist in Shawn Ring thinking about, whether it's your company or anything else? Bring people into a futurist thinker.
Okay, that's an easy one for me.
All right, good.
Okay, not the futurist thinker, but what's fueling me.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna state it from the identity God gives us. Okay, He calls us sons and daughters, right? And I was asked by a board member I was presenting to several hundred people, and the audience was just casual, conversational. Me and the CEO are on the stool, and we're both looking at each other. And he's got the mic. He's just asking me regular questions. And in the audience are high net worth fund managers and people that both give to the ministry that we're connected to in this relationship, and then also invest in businesses. And when you marry impact and return on investment, and you don't compromise either one, it's one of the most difficult things on the planet. And at the same time, it's hard for people to swallow that you won't lose excellence in the process, because anything we ever seen is either impact and inefficient,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
efficient
Yeah.
and no impact and people don't matter.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So the idea that those two exist and that they're kingdom principles,
Yeah.
very difficult because you don't see a lot of examples.
Right.
And so, as many people know, in Avoda we've elected to walk that out without being exclusively Christian in our hiring practices.
Mm.
So we compete in the AI market, and again, not use AI. We develop AI.
Creating it. Yeah.
Yeah, we compete on the national level. We compete for capital, so investment. We compete for customers, and we compete for staff,
Talent.
and talent. Those are the three areas. And if we can compete in those three areas, we will win. That's why I believe fundamentally the Bible should be in that environment because it deserves the best, and His word does not return void.
Yeah.
So in this, there's this tension. And I was in this meeting, and as a CEO raises capital, I get to meet with a lot of fund managers, and
that was fund with
Fund.
D, not
Fund.
fun managers.
not fund managers.
Yeah, okay,
Although
yeah.
my chief financial officer, he says that's chief fund officer. Everyone's like, you
don't
hear
think
all
so.
the groan. You hear the groan in the meeting. But this particular case, so I meet with a lot of venture capitalists, private equity groups, family funds, and then just individuals who have investment capital. And so I get to see a lot of birth of individuals and entities that have responsibility to manage funds and their return. And they really, in venture capitalists and private equity, they really tighten that noose so that it's very unforgiving toward profitability and getting every ounce out of that profitability. When you go to raise capital, venture capitalists, and I'm sorry if anyone's a venture capitalist that's listening to this, but in most cases they speak out of both sides of their mouth, and it's primarily they're testing you, right? They'll come in, they'll say, you're just a little late on this, and a little bit, you guys are moving pretty fast. You'll hear that on two opposite sides of the conversation. I'm thinking to myself,
which one
yeah,
is it?
okay. You were just testing me at this point. So in this board meeting, or not board meeting, but dinner, I saw a venture capitalist stand up. I'm like, oh Lord, please let that question be because I'm dealing with a lot of influencers in this room.
Yeah.
And I saw him too, and his body language was one where I know this question's coming, and it was open. So he goes, explain to me why you don't do the nonprofit work in a nonprofit. So he's already leading the witness with the question. And the for-profit work in the for-profit, and just keep them separate. Why are you putting them together? It's confusing. And by the way, most venture capitalists want a one-trick pony and they want to flip it and make money. So I understand what's driving the question, and it's not wrong in a lot of cases. However, if you're trying to hold in tension those two things, it's wrong to not do it. And I'll explain. So he asked me the question, and I'm like, Jesus, you are a master of one-liners. I need a one-liner right now, and it needs to be a mic drop. I want something heavy for this room because there are a lot of believers in the room, and I fundamentally believe in what we're doing, that God's behind it, and He's asked me to do it. So this is His problem, not mine. So I'm like, give me the line. And it took a second. And then I just said, I ended up giving 3 or 4 sentences, but this is the communication. I said, I think as a son, it's lazy to do that. And he looks at me, I could tell he's confused by the question, the response. I said, I have a birthright and an identity that's been given to me by my father. And I'm not talking about my dad, pastor. I'm talking about my father. He's given me this identity, and I have a responsibility in that. And I think it's easier, yes, but I would be picking easy. Think about this. How many of us dedicate our lives to Christ 7 days a week, balance it out in all conversations, all purposes, and don't farm it to Sunday? I mean, that is not, at my age, it's difficult. It's not an easy task. Right. Now, lead, build, and do both And as a son, I think he's called us to do that.
Mm.
Take the story of the talents. Imagine he mentions several people, several talents. Imagine that's one person. Do any of you in the audience have a talent buried? Because the tax code you work in or you're engaged with doesn't allow you to invest it.
Mm.
And the CEO grabs the mic out of my hand and he drops it.
Right? Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I went,
Yeah.
thank you, Lord.
All right,
So
the
I
Lord
hit
did it.
home with it. I
Yeah.
hit home. That's great. So to kind of wrap
Yeah.
up, what's exciting for me that I've noticed as a pattern is that that the environment is moving where there's opportunity for us to be holistic
Yeah.
in our identity and it not matter about our tax code.
That's good.
And it doesn't mean you're wrong if you work for someone and can't modify the tax code.
Right.
But if you are a leader, a CEO, a builder, a founder, you have a responsibility to go, oh, what is my identity here, and how do I
So
I
good.
craft it
So
to
good.
fit that identity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the Lord loves that creativity.
Yeah. Well, you've lived a life of creatively walking with the Lord, allowing Him to use you to birth new things and do a lot of things. And man, thank you for sharing that journey with us today. And you can wrap up in prayer, but I just thank you, Shawn.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing us into that journey for you and giving us some insight of what that's looked like. We appreciate
Well,
it.
I'm honored that you invited me to share God's story and my story. And I've been watching the podcast. I see what you guys are doing, and it's just great. And it's
Thank you.
that voice is missing generally in a wide berth. Business and leaders are not something that's typically served really, really, really well. And I know your history, your foundations are critical because the moment we do that, we're under fire. And the principles that are covered here by so many other people's learnings that you're teasing out and then crafting really gives a lot of truth for men and women who need it. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
So, Shawn, if somebody's watching this and they go, I have some funds, I have wealth, I have some funds I want to invest, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, thanks for even offering that. I think our company is Avodah, so it's AVODAH.com, and we're based in Westlake, Texas. Now, my invitation goes broader than that. We have been working with CEOs in the new founding spaces to work together to learn, and there's networks. So there's other leaders that are coming together.
Yeah.
I've told you about it, Tom, and the idea of Eli being a part of that as well as us being a part of what's there. We are opening a new round, so if there's obviously investors that are interested in doing that, I'd be happy to talk to them. But I think the invitation's a little broader too, because we're looking for and we see it. It's happening all over the world, but even in the U.S., it's accelerated since COVID. So would love anyone just reach out and connect. So
we're thankful for you, for your friendship, and for the work you're doing. You're living a life that honors God in the workplace, and that's amazing. Thank you.
thanks, Tom.
I'm going to pray. Lord, we just thank you for every person watching today and pray for the message that Shawn's life reflects, that God, you would enable people to understand that you call us into the work that you give us. And when you do, you anoint us, you bless us, you lead us, and we can move forward in you. Let that be the message today, and we'll give you praise. Thank you, Lord, for your work. Pray your blessing over every person watching today. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 God bless you.